become a history professor in life, and it was his older brother Edgar that was predicted to be President of the United States. Well, what do you think Dwight did after graduation from high school? And you're going to see that these people start doing this. What did he do after high school? You'd think that maybe he was bright enough to go what? College, but he didn't. He actually went to work full-time at that creamery where his dad worked to help pay Edgar's first-year college expenses. Okay?
So were they like really close in age then?
Pretty close, yeah. So after graduation from high school, Dwight worked full-time at a creamery to help with Edgar's first-year college expenses. And you'll kind of see that siblings do that. So Dwight works to help send his brother through college, so obviously he couldn't afford to send himself to college, so he decided to apply for what? The military academies. Very good. He applied to the military academies. Well, if you ever do that, and I hate to say this, but it's not always what you know, it's who you know. So if you're going to get a military appointment, you're going to have somebody in your corner. Normally that's a member of the House or the Senate or somebody kind of big up in politics to, vouch for you and write a letter. Well, the help that Dwight received was from a senator from Kansas by the name of Joseph Brostow. Joseph Brostow was the senator that vouched for, so to speak, Dwight, so he would have an opportunity possibly to get into a military academy. So Dwight received help from Senator Joseph Brostow of Kansas, who spoke in behalf of Dwight, and because of his help, Dwight earned an acceptance to West Point, or the U.S. Army Academy. Did I spell it wrong in there or something? Do you need another sheet here?
No.
Okay. So Dwight received some help from Senator Joseph Brostow. I do have another one right here. You guys want? You want the next one? It's okay. It's free. Well, Eisenhower went to West Point, and he actually played on the football team there and was a pretty good football player until a knee injury ended his career. So Eisenhower played on the football team at West Point until a knee injury ended his career. But he was a pretty good football player, yeah.
This is pretty off topic, but, so Navy, this is another military school. Wyoming has beat Navy and Boise State this year in the rank below both of them. They still haven't sent it to.
Nobody believes, but I'll tell you, you better start believing, because I think Wyoming's going to do something this year. But that's crazy rankings. I'll talk about Louisville later. Okay. Anyway, after Dwight graduated from West Point, not after, he graduated from West Point in 1915, and he ranked 61st in a class of 164. Okay. So he graduated from West Point in 1915, 1-5, ranking 61st in a class of 164. And he left the academy with a military rank of 2nd lieutenant. That's the officer level he earned at West Point. So he graduated in 1915, he ranked 61st in a class of 164, and he left the military academy with a rank of 2nd lieutenant. Well, on July 1st of 1916, two pretty important things happened to Dwight. First thing that happened to him on July 1st of 1916 is he was promoted to 1st lieutenant. Got his first promotion pretty quick. On July 1st of 1916, he was promoted to 1st lieutenant. And then what happened to him on that same day he was promoted? He got married, actually, good guess. He married the former Mamie Dowd. He married the former Mamie Dowd. And both those things happened to him on July 1st of 1916. Now, you don't have to write this down, I just want you to listen, though. Dwight and Mamie had two sons. Kind of an interesting story with one of them. Well, both, one sad and one kind of interesting. The first son's name was Dowd David Eisenhower, and he died of scarlet fever at the age of 3. So they lost their first son. The second son, John Sheldon Eisenhower, actually became an Army officer and a diplomat, and he married Julie Nixon, President Nixon's daughter, in a White House ceremony. So he married Nixon's daughter, which is, kind of a big deal. Nixon married both of his daughters. They married both in the White House. So that was kind of an exciting thing. So that was the sons that Dwight and Mamie had. Well, from 1916 until 1948, what did Eisenhower do? Well, he continued his military career, okay? So from 1916 until 1948, he continued his career in the military. And I'm going to list 7 important events in order of what happened to Eisenhower during his military career. So from 1916 to 1948, he served his military career, and here are the 7 important events that happened to him. In 1933, number 1, in 1933, he became an aide to who? That he took to Korea with him? General MacArthur, which was a big deal. In 1933, Dwight Eisenhower becomes an aide to General Douglas MacArthur. Number 2, just prior to the start of World War II, Eisenhower was given his first command of the 3rd Army. So just prior to the start of World War II, Eisenhower was given command of the 3rd Army. Very prestigious army in our military service. Number 3, in March of 1942, he was promoted to Major General. March of 1942, he was promoted to Major General. In June of 1942, he was named Commanding General of all U.S. forces in the European theater of World War II. In March of 1942, June of 1942, he was named Commanding General of all U.S. forces in the European theater of World War II. In 1943, he masterminded Operation Overlord, the invasion of France at Normandy, and carried it out on June 6, 1944. So in 1943 is when Eisenhower masterminded Operation Overlord, the invasion of France at Normandy, and he took part in commanding that, obviously led it on June 6, 1944. What do you think happened between number 6 and December of 1944? Because the 7th thing is he retired in 1948. What happened to him in December of 1944? He got his 5th star. He was promoted to 5-star general in December of 1944. So the 6th thing that happened to him of significance during his military career is he was promoted to 5-star general in December of 1944. And the 7th thing that happened is he retired from active military duty in 1948. So that's a quick synopsis of what he accomplished, although much more than you could ever write down in a lecture period. Anybody want to guess what he did after he retired? This kind of surprised me. He became president of Columbia University in New York City. That's an Ivy League school. And he became president of Columbia University. President of Columbia University. And then during the time he served as president of Columbia University, he wrote a book entitled Crusade in Europe. Crusade in Europe. And here is the book. Crusade in Europe. Well, we're kind of going back to the election. This is kind of an interesting story. When President Truman decided not to run for re-election in 1952, there are a lot of groups, liberal Republicans, who supported him for the presidency. But he was not quick to commit himself. He didn't really belong, believe it or not, to any specific political party in 1952 when they were talking about this election. He didn't belong to a party. He even refused an offer of $40,000 from McCall's magazine just to state that he was a member of the Republican Party. They were going to give him $40,000 just to say in their magazine, McCall's magazine, that he was a Republican, and he showed his dignity and turned it down. Okay, so he was offered $40,000 from McCall's magazine just to state he was a member of the Republican Party. Keller Rogers would have sold himself out in a New York second. Now think about $40,000 in 1952 would be probably 3 times that or more now. Well, when he was first approached about running for president, he declined, but later was quoted as saying, quote, "Perhaps a soldier's duty might include service in the White House." So when he was first approached about running for president in 1952, he declined to be a candidate, but later was quoted as saying, quote, "Perhaps a soldier's duty might include service in the White House." Now, you don't have to really write this down, but you know that he was nominated by the Republican Party during the election of 1952, right? And we know he was elected. And we know he served 2 terms, and he becomes the first president of the United States to have his terms of office limited by what? 22nd Amendment to the United States Constitution. He becomes the first president. Okay, he left office in January of 1961 when President-elect Kennedy was inaugurated, and he retired to his farm, which was located, ironically, in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So Eisenhower left office in January of 1961 when Kennedy was inaugurated, and he retired to his farm in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So what did he do during his retirement? He wrote books of his memoirs, and he raised cattle on his farm. That's what he did. So he wrote his memoirs, and he raised cattle. Well, Eisenhower had a history of heart problems, especially after World War II. And as a result of those heart problems, he died on March 28, 1969, of a heart attack. So President Eisenhower had a history of heart problems, and as a result, he died of those complications on March 28, 1969. He was buried in Abilene, Kansas, where the Dwight D. Eisenhower Presidential Library is located. That's what presidents do when they retire. They write their memoirs, they are involved in building a presidential library, usually in their hometown. And that's where he is buried, is in Abilene, Kansas. Okay? Any questions on Dwight Eisenhower? Okay, I want to just slip real quick like, because I'm going to save you a lot of writing here, and we'll talk about the Eisenhower administration and his cabinet. And there's a few things you need to write down, but this sheet that I handed to you right here is his cabinet. So you just have to listen and write a couple things, and we'll give you that. Okay? Now, you got to remember that President Eisenhower administration is going to be much different than the Franklin Roosevelt and the Harry Truman presidencies. Now, I want you to think about what I'm saying here, and then maybe write it down if you understand it the way you should. Truman and Roosevelt pressed Congress to pass their programs and then have Congress carry them out. And what I mean by that, and it's important you understand this, is that they were making programs, and Congress's job was to make sure that people followed their programs. President Eisenhower believed that Congress should shape the programs, and then he would carry them out. It was totally different, okay? Totally opposite, okay? Roosevelt, Truman, they would pass policy, so to speak. Congress would be responsible to carry out policy. Eisenhower wanted Congress to pass policy, and his responsibility would be to carry them out. Now, he really didn't want that. He wanted his cabinet members and his appointees and his aides really to carry out the policies. He only wanted to be bothered if what? They couldn't handle it. Only the most difficult problems were to come to him. So Congress is going to pass policy and law, right? He's not going to influence that. And then he wants his cabinet and he wants his advisors to make sure it's carried out. And he only wanted to be bothered if there was a very difficult problem that needed a big decision. Okay, so he's kind of sitting in the background. Now if you look at this handout I gave you, and you can jot down whatever you want, you can kind of look at that. The names in the underlined and biggers are identifications. In other words, those would be ones you would be responsible to know. And you can see he had 2 secretaries of state, John Foster Dulles and Christian Herter. He had 2 secretaries of the Treasury. He had 3 secretaries of defense, including Charles E. Wilson. He had 2 attorney generals. He had 1 postmaster general. He had 1 secretary of agriculture. You LDS kids better know who that is, right? Tell us, Ezra Taft Benson, what's the story on him? He was a prophet for which church? The LDS church, right? Highly revered man, is he not? Okay. Had 1 secretary of agriculture. 1. Good one. Secretary of the Interior. 2. Secretary of Commerce. 3. Secretary of Labor. 2, including Martin P. Durkin. Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. 3. What does that tell you about his cabinet? Was considered one of the weakest in American history because he kept changing. Do you think that's normal to have that many people in those positions? No. There were continual changes throughout his cabinet. I'll give you an example of 2. Labor Secretary Martin Durkin resigned right after he was appointed under scandal. And Defense Secretary Charles Wilson, who was the former president of General Motors, that was his job before he became Secretary of Defense, he was once quoted as saying, "What is good for General Motors is good for the country." So he had a very, very, very bad cabinet. The 2 bright spots, quite frankly, were Ezra Taft Benson and John Foster Dulles. If you want to star those, you can. But again, there were continual changes in Eisenhower's presidency. That's not good. Okay? He had Labor Secretary resign under scandal. He had a Defense Secretary who was the former president of General Motors who said what's good for General Motors is good for the country. So his lone bright spots in his cabinet were Ezra Taft Benson and Secretary of State John Foster Dulles. Okay? All right, tomorrow we'll start out with modern republicanism. That's going to be the name of his. And then I'm going to introduce you to subtopics I love. The first one's 1953 at a glance. We tell you some kind of unique things that happened in January, February, March, April, May. They're kind of fun. So that's what we'll do tomorrow, and we'll just kick butt and take names here until we get through this material.